Memoirs of Aurelia, recounting her life as a member of the Aurelia family. These particular details originate from her own feelings of the situation and may not reflect the total truth regarding her experiences. Sanctity, a place or thing with an indescribable quality. A home is a type of sanctity, but I don't think I've ever felt that kind of attachment or reverence for it. Most people go through life living through so many different kinds of sanctities, the kind of belonging they feel to everything around them. This feeling of beginning, or rather belonging, is what makes something like a society possible in the first place. I've often wondered what it would feel like to experience that kind of reassurance, the feeling of having a place to return to. Well, I suppose I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's go through introductions first. My name is Aurelia, and I am the youngest daughter of the Aurelia noble house. In the Kingdom of Lowen, often called the last great monarchy in the world, there exist many noble houses who each serve their own unique purpose. Perhaps in the past, people would imagine nobles to be arrogant and decadent ignoramuses who only selfishly indulge in their own vices at the expense of others. If it was a century ago, then you would surely have hit the proverbial nail right on the head. However, things have taken a drastic turn ever since Queen Victoria took the throne for herself. No longer would futile incompetence be tolerated, and under her rule, all wasteful noble houses that could not contribute were crushed under her iron fist. In the early 1800s, the Queen's purge caused countless businesses to go bankrupt, plummeting the economy into the abyss with no hope of being salvaged. This economic recession caused many to become unemployed and desperate to survive. Noble houses could no longer indulge in their wealthy lifestyles and had no choice but to squander their lands, factories, and whatever else they could sell in order to make it out of this crisis. But in every disaster there lies a silver lining. The people who were once suppressed under the class system could finally raise their heads and seek their own opportunities to climb beyond mere birthrights. Many new merchant associations began taking root and lifting the broken pillars back up with new foundations. With the advancements of steam technology, just after the reversal of this recession, the economy was catapulted back into the skies. Like an arrow being drawn back and fired, the Queen's scheme to raise the nation was truly profound and terrifying. The few noblemen who still had the sense to see the changing of eras took this chance to throw away their prejudice in order to survive as noble lineages. They allowed wealthy merchants to marry into the family and used their financial backing to exert their influence as proper nobles, while the merchants were all too happy to agree to this transaction for the simple reason that they could use money and arranged marriages to access the status of nobility. It was simply a lucrative outcome for all parties involved. My family, the Aurelia were an example of this kind of transaction. My father was a true blue-blood noble, and my mother was the only heiress to one of the biggest merchant associations. Despite this arranged marriage, my parents seemed to actually truly love each other, which is perhaps the only good thing that came out of their connection. The Aurelia family mainly specialized in artistic pursuits, from music, calligraphy, writing, painting, and much more. Almost every single important art event in Lowen had our family at the center in one way or another. It should then be no surprise that my sisters and I were raised in an environment that practically left us no other choice but to pursue art as our careers. I have two older sisters, Maria, who carved life from a marble with her profound sculpting, and Marianne, who could lull a demon to sleep with her incredible voice. I was proud to have such incredible siblings, and they were proud of my own talents. Despite my youth, I possess an incredible disposition that allows me to remember memories from when I was just born. Because of this ability, many servants frowned at me and looked terrified to even speak in my presence. "A demon child," they whispered behind closed doors, trying to lower their conspiratorial whispers and gossip. It didn't take me long to realize that I couldn't feel a connection from them. Unlike my parents and siblings, they shunned any attempt at getting closer. That was when I learned about malice for the first time. To protect me from their cold stares, my mother would often send me to the gallery room to paint or read books after the butler brought them to me. I was a very mature child, so I understood that I couldn't expect my parents to constantly watch over me, as they had business to attend to. Sometimes, I'd be in the gallery room until it got dark outside. I could hear the rustling of the leaves, the howling of the wind, and I could feel the warmth of the sun fading as the night covered the skies. At that time, I felt no real fear. In fact, I didn't know what it meant to be afraid. I kept coloring the canvas with colors that looked pretty together. I never understood my father when he ranted about the theory of aesthetics and contemporary art forms to me. I simply filled in the colors I saw and the shape that spread on the canvas. My father loved painting, so to see me walk down the very same path likely inspired pride in his heart. But it didn't take long for him to look at me with the same eyes as the rest of the servants. I don't know exactly when it started, but I can remember a particular incident that happened around the time I was 7 years old. My father had called me to the gallery room in order to practice painting with him. I was overjoyed at the idea and spent all morning in bliss, running around in willful excitement. When I reached the gallery, my father gave me a brush and tried explaining techniques on how to balance colors, shade the brighter tones, and even how to explore my own style. I couldn't understand a single thing, but I was happy to spend time with him like this. Wanting to make him proud, I began filling in the canvas with the images that came to mind, just like he had explained them to me. As soon as I started painting, my father went silent. I thought to myself, he must be closely scrutinizing my process in order to better teach me. But even after I was done, my father merely stood there as still as a statue. He muttered things I couldn't quite hear, shivering in abject horror. Was my painting really that bad? He didn't talk to me much after that. There was a similar case with my mother as well. She had always loved to read books. I approached her to teach me, and she gladly showed me her vast collection. Thus my days were then spent nose deep in one text or another. From scientific, medical, fiction, or historical books, I read them all. As long as there was something new to be learned, my curiosity knew no limits. It was during this period that my mother replaced a tutor, and she personally oversaw my education. She was strict, but fair, and before long, I had already surpassed the level of children my age. Mother was proud of me, but then she seemed to have realized something after thinking about it for a while. Her expression became paler by the second, before she finally stumbled and fell to the floor. She was bedridden for 2 whole weeks after that incident, and rarely spoke to me thereafter. Being alienated by both my mother and father finally made me realize the truth about a sanctity, about that curious feeling of belonging somewhere. I learned that the reason why a sanctity exists is because there are things that can desecrate it. Just like how there cannot be good without evil, there can't be a safe place without the existence of danger. And the most terrible blow of all was the understanding that I was the reason my parents felt that their sanctity had been breached. I had no refuge. The isolation, the loss of all the connections I thought I had, shattered my spirit into countless fragments. There was only a vast chasm left in place of that sanctity. When someone loses everything they hold dear, the only thing left is the lamentation of that which once was, or perhaps of what could have been. My sleep was endlessly fretful after those experiences. As fortune would have it, that loss simply drifted away from my mind. I had a realization once more. The realization that I could not lament my loss, because I never had once possessed those things in the first place. It was all just an illusion I felt from the colors. Ah yes, the colors. How could I forget to mention something so important? To call my disposition something like perfect memory was not entirely accurate. If I truly had a perfect memory, then there was no way I could forget these memories in the first place. Rather, it was that I could experience the time that most people could not. The colors all around me had boundless vicissitudes, the kind that ordinary people could not see, much less interact with. I can still remember the taste of the milk my mother fed me when I was a newborn, or the conversations my sister's statues had when they were being sculpted. I could even smell the song my sister sang at her performances. The wonderful smell of mint and rosemary. I was 9 years old when I truly understood that the experiences I could feel, hear, touch, smell, and taste were vastly different from others. I had finally discovered it, a sanctity of my own. When a person discovers sanctity, they can then create their very own sanctuary. Every person has some kind of sanctuary, a place they can feel at ease and truly express themselves. My sanctuary was the gallery room. It was the place where I could freely explore the experiences of colors without the prying eyes of those who simply could not understand. With free rein, I explored as much as I possibly could. I tried tasting anger and hatred. I walked through the gardens and listened to the story of the flowers. One time, I even managed to touch the stars. I no longer felt lonely. Who could feel isolated or stifled when they could speak to colors and hear the sound of letters? This was my calling, my pride, and my hope. I could never be separated from those experiences again. One day, as I was once again coloring those expressions on my canvas, I realized it was getting harder and harder to see. Putting down my brush, I looked around me in muted annoyance. It seems that in my reverie, I had failed to take notice that it was already quite dark outside. Very rarely do I continue painting until late, but I just couldn't get enough of the delicious taste from the history book I was reading earlier. I really wanted to paint that taste on my canvas before it got covered up in all kinds of other experiences. That was a downside of having this kind of talent, I suppose. There are endless experiences all around me, but the sheer quantity meant they often got mixed together, creating strange sensations. If I wanted to capture a specific expression, I'd have to focus on it constantly in order to keep it pure. Sighing to myself, I got up from the old oak chair that served as my backrest and made my way down the hall not far from the entrance to the room. Bending down, I picked up a steam-powered gas lamp and walked towards my workshop with bated breath. Holding the lamp in my left hand, I raised it high enough to see the various bottles and jars kept in the cabinets. Those containers were filled with powdered pigments. I took out the key held in my breast pocket and opened the rightmost cabinet. After picking the jars I needed, I made my way to the workstation. It was a granite table with gear mechanisms attached to the outer edge that controlled a miniature press and mill. Next to the workstation, there was another small cabinet filled with a wide variety of drying oils, ranging from flax oil, whale oil, sunflower oil, and many more exotic oils. There were even a few types of wax. However, these were kept in special sealed containers. After grabbing some flax oil, I moved to the center of the workstation. First, I spread some of the pigments in small grooves that dotted the table, and then carefully added my flax oil. After that, I turned the crank on the left side of the table, which caused the steam pressure to crush the oil and pigment mixture into a soft paste. This paste was then passed through the mill a few times before I checked on the mixture. Scanning over the paste for inconsistencies in taste, I would add more oil and mill it a few more times until it finally had the taste I wanted it to have. Satisfied, I wiped the sweat from my brow and made my way to the canvas with fresh paint. Sometimes I would have to paint from scratch since the pre-made ones simply didn't taste the way I wanted them to. In cases where the sound was off, the feeling a little rough, or the taste a tad strange, I had to remake the oil paint from scratch. What was the point of capturing an expression using faulty methods? Picking up my brush, I focused on the experience I was trying to express and attacked the canvas. This time, the focus was on change. The flood of waves in disharmony that changed into mute and stagnant foil. Gently and softly, the brush tapped the outer edges with an ultramarine blue. Its encroachment was slow and methodical. Every gentle stroke moved further from the point of contact. Then, a lead white was spread over with a 3-centimeter brush, making a cross shape across the canvas. I blended it with the ultramarine blue to capture the swirls. As more expressions were etched onto the swirls, I became happier and happier. However, all that did was cloud my judgment from realizing something. Ever since I returned to my canvas, all I could feel was that single expression from before. Little by little, all the colors around me began disappearing into the tenebrous room. There was only this heavy feeling of despair lingering in the air. My heart quickened its beats, and my breaths became shallower in content. This was the first time something like this had happened to me. Almost instinctively, I grabbed the gas lamp and opened its cap to spread as much light as possible. It's hard to describe how unnatural it all felt. The light that should have illuminated the entire workstation seemed to get dimmer with every passing second. My body just froze up, like prey caught in the line of sight of a predator. I just sat there, hoping and wishing that my gas lamp could illuminate the room. But bit by agonizing bit, the area that the light illuminated became shorter and shorter. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in terror, when the silence was finally broken by a low, dripping sound. I turned around to look where the sound was coming from. What greeted my eyes was a singular black dot on the canvas. Like ink, it coagulated and stained everything on the canvas with a vivid, starless black. I couldn't feel anything from it, not a single thing. It was like suddenly turning blind after having seen normally all my life. The blotch of starless black slowly leaked onto the floorboards. The sound it made, the smell, nothing. There was nothing. It spread out until it reached the tip of my shoe. That was when I felt it, the nothingness. It was more fearsome than any act of violence could ever hope to be. In that moment, I truly felt like everything I had ever done, everything I am, was utterly worthless. I couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing the gas lamp, I mustered whatever courage I could and ran through the darkened halls towards my room. For some reason, I thought everything would end if I just reached my room. I almost kicked the door open as I stumbled inside and locked it. I turned on every gas lamp I could and surrounded myself with them. They would surely protect me from that encroaching darkness. Just at the edge of the room, I could see the light dim once again. I froze in place, trepidation taking root. Maybe if I sat as still as possible, I could avoid that horrible fate. The starless black ink covered the edge of the window and gathered into a small pool right next to my dressing table. It slowly coalesced and took a vaguely humanoid shape just outside the light's reach. It had no real bones or skin, just a weird fluid-like consistency. It wasn't still either. The black ink swirled around, always changing, never the same. No experiences, no senses. There was no reflection of any kind, so I couldn't see it. The only reason I could tell it was there was because it was the only spot where the light refused to touch. Every now and then, it felt like the black ink took the shape of faces or limbs. More like twisted mockeries of them anyway. I couldn't hear anything. It was all just silent. Despite standing right there, I could not feel anything. There was only the void. Thinking back, perhaps I should have screamed, or maybe called someone. But who could I call to deal with something like this? There was just nothing I could do. I just sat there, bathed in light, watching, wondering if this was the last thing I'd ever do. There was no movement, no sudden halt. It just stood there. I stared at it for an hour, then 2, and before I knew it, daylight had already reached through the curtains. With the sunrise, it simply vanished, like it was never there. I don't quite remember what I did that morning. Perhaps I ran around like a lunatic, spouting about demons, or maybe I just fell asleep. It doesn't matter what happened, because the following night, it was there again. I had placed an almost obscene amount of gas lamps around my room in preparation. That night was the same as the previous night. I sat in muted silence as everything in the world turned dark. When every one of the gas lamps burned out, I just replaced them as fast as I could. Every night, it seemed to get closer and closer until it eventually reached right next to my bedside. At this point, I was practically a scattered mess. Long nights of pressure and no sleep had made me an anxious and paranoid husk. I couldn't care about appearances or expressions during that whole ordeal. I contemplated killing myself for a time. I truly wondered if that was a better fate than dying to this monster. It was on the very same night I thought about such things that I first saw it move. It had appeared closer before, but I had never seen it actually move during the process. It just appeared where it wanted to. Breathing heavily, I held the gas lamp right in front of it. The light seemed to keep it away from me all the other nights. Why would it fail me now? It was at that moment that I heard it break the silence for the first time. The amorphous faces appeared on its body and echoed. The light never once stopped me. Everything went dark after that. From the very beginning, that darkness had no experience. There was nothing to feel, nothing to smell, nothing to see, nothing to touch, and nothing to taste. It was not something. I couldn't experience it. There was never anything there. End.